I think he looks better than we got what was that comment? Thanks.
That wasn't me.
All right, see my bald spot back here. I'm sorry about that. Welcome to our second meeting at the Spaghetti Western this year. Have a good turnout here, and we have pretty good turnout on the Zoom too. So it's working out pretty well, and I'm sure more people will be on Zoom shortly. Jim Clark, it's good to see you. It's been a while. Well, it's always good to see you, and especially as busy as you are in Canada today with your election. I hope you.
Well, this is more interesting than that.
Yeah. We have a new member here today. His first meeting, Carl Owens. No, he's been a lifetime basketball coach. Coaches Basketball Hall of Fame here in Texas. That's pretty good. Then we got Christian Smith way back in the back. Christian is his first meeting. As you may have noticed, several members have brought in books for your pleasure. We thank you. A lot of them are Bill McCurdy's books he had in his library. And we have a few duplicates back there. Kyle brought in some books, and some others have brought in some books. In fact, Carl brought in some books. So after kind of our main speaker, we'll probably take a little break, and you can pick out whatever book you would like to take. There is one book in that group. I won't tell you which one it is, but I've been trying to get it for the last 10 years. And I think that might be right. Cheapest price I could find on the internet was $100.
I grabbed that little green book.
So we have two of those back there.
Really?
Yeah. So that's pretty special. And of course, Fred had brought in a number of his publications and things that he did for the San Diego chapter that he could share with us. Fred is now living on the Gulf Coast, and he had some damage, unfortunately, a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, fishing pier.
Lost a pier.
Gone.
But he said he was safe, and we're very happy about that. We do have speakers set up for the month of October. We're having the chairman of the Babe Ruth Hall of Fame is going to speak to us. He also heads up the Baltimore Sabre chapter, and he's going to speak to us. And we're working on a scouting proposition for November. We're hoping to have a couple scouts. One might be near and dear to one of our members if he's available. And we also have a professor from Cleveland that has to speak. Before we start, I do want to remind all you youngins here that we do have a vintage baseball team. And we will be playing on October 23rd at the George Ranch. And we want to encourage anyone who's Maxwell, anyone who's available, Jim, you young guys. Hey, Gloria, good to see you. And Gloria, too. Come play for us. We'll play at 11 o'clock on Saturday morning against Bob Copus's Red Sox. And we'll put on exhibition. We have uniforms. We have rules. We play by 1860 baseball rules. Wow. And they're having a major exposition out there at the ranch. Talk about 1800s and lots of exhibits, and they've asked us to put on an exhibition for them. So if you're interested, please let Mike and myself know, and we'd be thrilled to have you be with us.
Nice.
So October 23rd. October 23rd, Saturday. Yep. And if you don't want to play, you can come and be a crank. Yep. They fan. So come out and join us. It'd be a 2 days activity.
Right next to the baseball field is brewery now, right?
Yeah. And
Yes.
Bob brings up a good point. We will be fed by the ranch. They do feed the exhibitors, and I guess we're considered good. So that's good. If you want a free meal, fresh air, baseball, and there's no minimum age or no maximum age. We have a few veterans out there.
What time is that?
It'll be 11 o'clock. The game will be at 11 o'clock. We'll probably be out there at 10. Got
Normally play a double header.
well, except most of our guys can't last that long.
Well, they're not 4 innings and 3 innings.
You know, well, maybe so. And from time to time, we will let spectators participate. They want to try to play. The game is a lot of fun. It's a game where you're trying to hit the ball. You're not trying to strike anybody out. In fact, you can't strike out and you can't walk. The bases are 90 feet apart. And we've had a couple guys collapse between first and second. But we use our own baseball. We made it in the 1860s. We have our own bats. It's a fun activity. Joe plays, Bob plays, Mike plays, I play.
Don't
We're going to play at it. We're
I'm
gonna play
on
at it.
fire. I'm flying Tom. Sorry.
Is that your stomach? Okay, without any further ado, Joe, we'd like you to introduce our guest speaker and
All right. Will do. Some people don't know me. I'm Joe. I'm the one that sends you all the crazy, updates about things that are going on Facebook or Twitter, things like that, even the website. So I talked to both of you, the new people, right? I think you sent me an email. Okay. And everyone online, can you hear me?
Hear you well.
I have to get my teaching voice today. So I had a little practice already. So we are privileged to be joined by Clayton Truder. I said that right, Clayton?
You sure did.
Okay. Who has wrote a book called Loserville, How Professional Sports Remade Atlanta, and how Atlanta remade professional sports. Now, as Astros fans, we know a lot about the Atlanta franchise. I believe it was Craig Biggio who once said, a reporter asked him in the 90s, talking about how do you feel about playing the Braves? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Biggio said, is there anybody else? Like the only team the Astros ever played up until that time was like the Braves. I know we played the Phillies and the Dodgers, but that kind of was the sentiment of the Astros of the 90s. And we could never get past them until, of course, Chris Burke did us all a favor in 2005 with that long game. So, Astros fans, we know a little bit about Atlanta. So, a little bit about Clayton. He holds a PhD in U.S. history from Boston College. Go, PhD in U.S. history.
I thought you said go Eagles, and I was a little surprised.
Go Eagles. Huh? Doug Flutie, right? Isn't that Boston College?
That's what I've heard.
All right. He holds a PhD from Boston College, teaches at, let me see, Norwich University.
Yes, it's called Military College in Vermont. Yep.
He's
military school.
Military school.
Yep. It's the oldest military school in the U.S.
Oldest military school in the U.S.
That's what they say. I'm not sure I believe it, but they always say that.
Norwich. Yeah. You're the chairman of the Vermont Sabre chapter, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay. He writes about college football and basketball for SB Nation. And of course, like I said, he's the author of Loserville, Professional Sports Remade Atlanta, and How Atlanta Remade Professional Sports. It's being published by the University of Nebraska, and it's coming out February 2022, right?
February 1st, 2022, available for pre-order on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all your fine online retailers.
That's a heck of a commercial.
That's my superpower.
And on that note, I'll turn it over to you. We look forward to this, and I'm going to shut up. I've been talking all day.
Joe, thanks for the fine introduction. Thank you all for being here, whether in person or on Zoom. Loserville is essentially a study of Atlanta's pursuit of pro sports in the 1960s and the response to Atlanta's teams in the 1960s and 1970s. I argue in the book that Atlanta is one of a handful of cities, Houston also included, which in many ways invent the modern sports business in the sense that Atlanta is one of these cities that begins the basically pay for play model that cities adopt in their pursuit of pro sports. Atlanta had a mayor named Ivan Allen, who was elected in 1961, who ran explicitly on a platform called Major League City. He ran on the idea that Atlanta was going to go from being a city of regional significance to a city of national significance by getting major professional sports. So he pushed for the building of an indoor arena, which ended up becoming the Omni, and a multi-purpose stadium, which became Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, the home of the Braves and the Falcons. Atlanta, I think, differs in some respects from some of the other expansion cities of the 60s in that the stadiums themselves weren't as much the source of prestige as merely the idea of becoming major leagues. Allen, as well as the civic leaders in Atlanta, were preoccupied with the idea of Atlanta's name appearing in newspapers in the standings alongside the names of New York and Chicago and Los Angeles. So the prestige of becoming a major league city, and also the idea that it would be a source of civic unity, where the major would be a major factor in terms of in terms of why you want to bring pro sports in. I would compare this to, say, Houston and New Orleans, that the actual structure, the Astrodome in the case of Houston and the Superdome in the case of New Orleans, that the venue itself was as much as anything the source of prestige as it was the pro sports franchises. Atlanta was very fixated on bringing particular teams in during this time period. So Atlanta, by investing in 2 pro sports stadiums, hyping itself like the city has did beginning in the 20s and continues to do so now, and also making generous civic investments in pro sports, convinces all 4 of the major professional sports leagues, the Major League Baseball, the National Football League, the NBA, and the NHL, all to put teams in Atlanta in a 6-year period. Atlanta goes from having no teams in 1966 to, by 1972, having teams in all 4 major professional sports. Many other cities, San Diego, Tampa, Phoenix, mimic what Atlanta does, as well as later generations of Sunbelt cities, in making these grand offers of investments to lure in pro sports. And I think many of them ended up finding what Atlanta found out. Simply bringing teams in does not immediately mean that the public is going to embrace them, that they're going to be successful on the field, that they're going to have broad civic support. Within a decade, the term Loserville becomes a well-known term locally to describe Atlanta's pro sports teams. This is both to describe their lack of success on the field as well as at the box office. By the mid-1970s, all 4 of Atlanta's teams were, with actually the possible exception of their hockey team, who it's insane having a hockey team in Atlanta, of course, in that time period, but with the possible exception of the Flames, who were middling, the other Atlanta pro sports teams were all pretty bad by the mid-1970s, and they were all near the bottom of their leagues in attendance. The Braves failed to draw 1 million fans between 1971 and 1979 in any season. The Falcons led the league in no-shows for several years in a row, including in 1974, when approximately 40% of the people who bought tickets to Falcons games didn't even bother to attend. Because the NFL is so built around season ticket sales, NFL teams count more people who don't actually show up than they do people who buy tickets. So Falcons games, even though the tickets were sold, had huge piles of empty seats game after game in spite of the tickets being sold. The Hawks were drawing 1/2 of the league's average in attendance by the mid-70s, and the Flames were also slightly below the league average in it. So the teams were bad. The teams lacked success at the box office as well. The term Loserville is not so much a commentary on Atlanta now, as obviously some of their teams have been very successful, at least for the first 3 quarters of a Super Bowl, or in the case of the Braves, they were very successful throughout the 90s and the 2000s. And the Hawks have obviously been good in recent years. Loserville is a term that a man named Louis Grizzard, who later became a well-known humorist, but at the time was the editor of the Atlanta Constitution, coined in a 2-part front-page series to detail the woes of Atlanta's professional sports franchises during the time period. So the title of the book is essentially an homage to that, this particular time and place in Atlanta sports. And I regard the book as being, to some extent, a cautionary tale, or in many ways, the story of how expansion ended up working out for a lot of cities. Why did things turn out the way they did, at least initially? There's a lot of reasons. First of all, most of these franchises had either out-of-town or very inexperienced ownership. In the case of the Braves, their ownership consisted in the 60s and 70s largely of the scions of large corporate guys from Chicago. heirs to large fortunes who didn't even live in Atlanta. In the case of the Falcons, they had an insurance man named Rankin Smith, who was their owner, who was very good at selling insurance, but seemed to not know a ton about football. Ended up employing a bunch of his insurance cronies as the team's front office. In 1967, the Falcons had a draft where not a single player they selected made the team. He had an insurance man who was a buddy of his named Frank Wall making the selections, who apparently did relatively little consulting with scouts on who to pick that year. In the case of both the Flames and the Hawks, they had Tom Cousins, who owned the team, who was a major real estate developer in Atlanta, who the reason he got involved with pro sports as much as anything was to have the Omni Arena serve as the starting point, which he leased from the city, the starting point for a downtown real estate empire, which never quite worked out as he intended. His structures ended up being something of white elephants in the middle of downtown. So you have a collective group of owners who aren't either that experienced or especially invested in pro sports as a business itself, running these teams in the 60s and 70s. The business of running a pro sports franchise, I think for many of them, proved a lot more specific and a lot more difficult than they had anticipated. In terms of attendance, Atlanta has the issue with the teams being bad, certainly. Exaggerating this is that the fan base is largely suburban. The city of Atlanta was a city of roughly 400,000 to 500,000 people at the time, in a city of 2 million. It remains a city of about 500,000 now in a metro area of about 6 million. So the population is incredibly dispersed, making the choice to come in to a game often a hassle for people, to go watch a bad team frequently. I think the summers in Atlanta, in the case of the Braves, were not particularly helpful. Playing in an outdoor stadium, expecting people to sweat it out in the stands in July and August in the Georgia heat, I think was a very difficult situation. Atlanta has a tremendous amount of transplants in it. People who who don't particularly associate themselves with the city of Atlanta. Back then and to this day, one would see a lot of jerseys and hats and all kinds of clothing from other teams in the stadium. There are lots of people who have moved there from New York or Chicago or Philadelphia or wherever else who continue to support those teams. That's tended to hurt Atlanta's pro sports franchises. Another issue is locally, the fans in Atlanta, the sports fans that existed in the city by the time pro sports got there, already had a range of sporting passions that were quite popular, whether it was college football or golf or boating or stock car racing or professional wrestling. The Hawks were very frequently at the Omni, a brand new arena with Pete Maravich, the most famous basketball player in the country at the time, outdrawn by professional wrestling about a mile away at an armory that was built during the Cleveland administration that didn't have air conditioning. Very frequently on a Friday night, there'd be 5,000 people, standing room only, to watch pro wrestling, and 3,500, 4,000 people to watch the Hawks in a brand new arena with Pete Maravich playing. So that's another issue they have. The pre-existing sporting passions in the region often superseded the interest in the new teams for the locals. Atlanta's teams were also pretty broadly available through broadcast media relative to other teams in the time period. So if you live 2 counties away, you could get many of the Braves games first on WSB and then later on Turner's stations. So the desire to go to a game was less for a lot of people. Additionally, in terms of the location of the stadium, for a lot of different audiences, the stadium was in an undesirable location. Atlanta Stadium was built on what was an urban renewal site that had originally been intended for low-income housing in the city. And for many of the former residents of that neighborhood, who were predominantly African American, tens of thousands of people had been displaced to start this urban renewal site in the early 1960s. People had been promised a new home in this location. Instead, the city sells the land to the stadium authority and builds a stadium there. So in terms of, particularly for African American citizens in South Atlanta, the relationship with the stadium, with the team, developed an adversarial quality as a result of that. In terms of suburban fans, the stadium ended up being in what proved to be a fairly rough neighborhood. For many years, Atlanta Fulton County Stadium was the stadium in the country in the zip code with the highest crime rate. So if it was merely perception or actual incidents, which there certainly were many of, many people perceived it as being in a not advantageous location, Atlanta Fulton County Stadium. This was also true to some extent with the Omni, but not to quite as great an extent. So you had a lot of factors happening simultaneously that were discouraging people from attending games to see these teams that were already struggling in the standings. The book is in many ways both a history of the city as well as a history of its teams. I go into the politics, the economics, the cultural aspects of this. I try to put it in a national setting as well to show that what's happening in Atlanta is influenced by what's happening elsewhere, and also how Atlanta's approach, in many times explicitly, influenced leaders in other cities. Leaders in San Diego, leaders in Tampa explicitly cited Atlanta's approach to getting pro sports as influencing the way they approached luring pro sports to their cities. The book also goes into a lot of the blow-by-blow particular of the teams as well. This was originally a 900-page book. Nebraska got it down to about 550. So whatever you're looking for politics, you're looking for economics, you're looking for the day-to-day of these teams, you're going to get a little bit of all of this in this book. And let me think if there's anything else I want to touch on. Yeah, I talked about the aspect with Houston. I think Houston's approach to getting pro sports was a little bit different. I think Hofheinz in some respects is a similar character to Ivan Allen in being this civic booster of getting pro sports in. But my impression is that Hofheinz was as much as anything interested in getting a prestigious structure in the city. From what I've read, he was as interested in getting a big air-conditioned mall in the city, which became the Galleria, as he was getting a stadium. That was certainly not Ivan Allen's approach. Ivan Allen was in many ways a political progressive at the time. Atlanta was certainly the most racially moderate city in the South in the waning days of Jim Crow, which in many ways encouraged people to invest in the city. Atlanta was, if you were a northern corporation, what was happening in Atlanta looked pretty progressive compared to what was happening in, say, Birmingham at the time. So that certainly helped Atlanta out in terms of luring teams. But I would say the fundamental difference between what happens in Atlanta and what happens in Houston is that Atlanta is very interested in the prestige of simply being major league, getting an amenity like the theater, like symphonies that a large important city would have. It would be part of the trappings of being a major city, and less interested in the building. If you look at Atlanta Stadium by comparison to the Astrodome cost more than twice as much to build it as Atlanta Fulton County Stadium. It took 3.5 years to build, the eighth wonder of the world. Atlanta Fulton County Stadium was built in 51 weeks, and it showed. Within a decade, many parts of the stadium were falling apart. One would see there was tremendous flooding in the stadium. It was very difficult to maintain the structure that had been thrown up so quickly, specifically to get the Milwaukee Braves into the stadium for 1965, which didn't end up happening because the Braves had an ongoing league battle with Milwaukee, which kept the team in town until 66. But Atlanta's approach was a little bit different, but I think both cities played a major role in essentially originating the modern approach that cities that wish to become major league take to the subject. That's basically the story of my book. I'm happy to answer any specific questions you have, and thank you for having me on.
What influence did Ted Turner's broadcasting network have on Atlanta?
Ted Turner saved professional sports in Atlanta. The city could well have been basically a desert of pro sports without Ted Turner. In 1973, Turner's station, which was then called WTCG, buys the rights to Braves baseball away from WSB, which had been a major broadcaster in the South since the 1920s. It's on a basically minor wattage UHF station, and he starts broadcasting 100 games a year. The Braves had already been broadcasting more than many teams on WSB, showing 30, 40 games a year, exclusively road games initially. Turner broadcast even more games. And in 1975, when the owners of the Braves, a group of guys known as the Rover Boys, who were a group of the sons of wealthy industrialists from Chicago, start to look to sell their team, which is losing them money. Their depreciation allowance had ended from when they brought the team to town. They were starting to lose money on the team year after year. They looked around for a local buyer. They didn't really have one. There was talk of moving the team to New Orleans to the Superdome. There was talk of moving the team to Toronto, which was pursuing a team at the time. Turner came up with an offer. He offered them $10 million over the course of 10 years. He's essentially the only pro sports owner that I know of that bought his team on the installment plan. The owners didn't want to get the team out of didn't want the team to leave Atlanta. I mean, they'd certainly gotten a lot of bad press 10 years earlier when they pulled the Braves out of Milwaukee, so they wanted to avoid that again. So they found a guy who had a connection to the team already, who over time eventually would pay for them. And the Braves, as well as the Hawks, which he purchased the next year, essentially served as inexpensive broadcasting for Turner for the duration of his ownership of the club. Initially, it's kind of a loss. I guess you'd call it a loss leader for him. But obviously, the Braves in the 80s start to develop the America's team reputation when they did win the division in 82. Then they go into slumbers for the rest of the decade and are terrible again. But once Turner gets the right guys in place, the Braves are a very obviously in many ways unprecedentedly successful organization in the 90s and 2000s. So Turner is in many ways what keeps those two franchises in town. And he keeps them in town essentially to serve as an anchor for his broadcasting empire, which is just beginning to develop at the time. I hope that answered your question. I hope I didn't go too far off with that, but
How popular was Hank Aaron in Atlanta?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
How popular was Hank Aaron in Atlanta during the 70s?
That is to some extent a matter of controversy, which I cover in the book. I mean, Aaron, everybody would have said they liked Hank Aaron, but the Braves drew incredibly poorly. I mean, the Braves had the second worst attendance in the National League to the Giants in both 73 and 74 in the midst of the home run chase, while the Braves had the top road attendance of any team in baseball both of those years. So I think there was in essence almost like an indifference to the Braves by them. The Braves were pretty much bad every year, or mediocre or disappointing, depending on the year. But everybody would have said they liked Aaron, and the Chamber of Commerce bought a bunch of billboards commemorating it, and all the newspapers had special sections about him. But in terms of the day-to-day support of Aaron, it's tough to say. He felt very, if you look at his memoir, If I Had a Hammer, Aaron was very angry about that, looking back on the indifference of Atlantans to his home run chase. I go into great detail in the book about the night he broke the record when he had a sellout crowd. He hits his home run, I think in the third inning it was. And by the sixth or seventh inning, there's like 8,000 or 9,000 people there. And they asked, well, why did people leave? Well, it was a little chilly. It was a school night. Everybody had a reason why they left. But by the end of the game, it was a ghost town, as it usually was on Braves home games. The next night, they drew 3,800 people. For many of Aaron's home runs after 700, the team drew well under 5,000 people for his home runs. And many of the people who were there were just, cramped in the bleachers trying to catch the ball. But the rest of the stadium was empty. So Aaron felt a little bit disrespected by the public in Atlanta during the time period. His relationship changed over time, particularly when Ted Turner bought the team. Turner completely embraced Aaron and his legacy, gave Aaron a prominent role in the organization, and Aaron over time had developed a much better relationship with the Braves. He also kind of unceremoniously leaves the team after the 74 season. They offer him essentially a PR position if he chooses to retire. He ended up continuing to play with the Milwaukee Brewers, though. But yeah, Aaron's relationship with the Braves in the early 70s was not a strong one. He also actually, being that this is Houston, he came into conflict with Milo Hamilton on several occasions too. Their relationship improved over time, but he said things on the air, and Aaron got wind of them, and there were a couple of times when they had some heat between them as a result of that. So Aaron's relationship was not always the strongest with the organization.
I heard at one time that Milo Hamilton said he made more money broadcasting Braves games than Henry Aaron did playing for the Braves.
Really, I didn't know. I think it's quite possible. Aaron by the early 70s was one of the top paid guys in baseball. Early on, it may well have been the case. One thing is Milo, when he gets to Atlanta in 66, was already a well-known commodity because the Chicago White Sox were one of about 4 or 5 teams to broadcast their games on the radio down there. So when the Braves had their first ever luncheon, the person who got the biggest applause from the local Chamber of Commerce was Milo Hamilton, because they all knew who he was because they'd been listening to him for several years broadcasting the White Sox.
Aside from the mayor's efforts, do you feel there were other considerations that led the Braves to choose Atlanta when they moved from Milwaukee?
Absolutely. I think the television market was the primary one. If you look at Milwaukee, especially once the Twins come into place, the Brewers were already hemmed into the South by the Chicago franchises. Having the Minnesota take away their northern kind of tier of support, even though Milwaukee at the time was a slightly larger city, it was a much smaller media market than Atlanta was. Atlanta had affiliates in 7 states. WSB was the most powerful radio and television station in the Southeast. They offered at the time a very generous television deal to the Braves, which was almost double what they were offered in Milwaukee. The guys who owned the Braves, coming from Milwaukee, they were known as the Rover Boys. In many ways, they got into it thinking they could make a killing buying a team, because when they brought the Milwaukee Braves, they looked across the state to the Green Bay Packers, who had this model since the 1920s of public ownership, selling stock in the team. So in 1962, the Milwaukee Braves tried to have a stock sale locally, but people just viewed it as this very cynical cash grab, and they only sold like 10% of the stocks they were looking to sell. Essentially, after the failed stock sale, and the Braves were also beginning to have a declining attendance, that's when they began looking elsewhere. And the Braves looked at several different markets. Atlanta just had the most generous offer and was the juiciest market, particularly as a media market for that franchise.
How about the Atlanta Hawks? How did they come from St. Louis to Atlanta?
It came about as a couple of different moving parts. The Hawks had been flagging in attendance for several years. They had a guy named Ben Kerner who had owned the Hawks from the time they were in Moline, Illinois. Moved from Buffalo to Moline, Illinois, to Davenport, Iowa, to Milwaukee, to St. Louis. He owned them through all these moves. It was basically his only business. He was a small businessman, originally from Buffalo, who got in the basketball business, had made some money with the Hawks when they'd been very successful with Bob Pettit and Cliff Hagan and those guys in the late 50s and early 60s. But as the team's attendance waned, he was looking to get out of the business and with some money, essentially. And Tom Cousins, who was itching to get this arena built, which became the Omni, went shopping around looking for an NBA team and got in contact with Kerner, and basically, in a very cloak and dagger kind of way, bought the team essentially in the middle of the night and brought them to Atlanta.
I remember Kerner used to get in fights with Red Auerbach.
Kerner had, one time I believe Red Auerbach burned him with his cigar during a game, I believe. Those guys had very contentious relationship, and the Hawks fans were incredibly merciless to the Celtics. Oftentimes with just the most vicious kinds of racial invective, the Hawks fans in St. Louis, Bill Russell in particular. The Hawks had a very rough and tumble kind of fan base in St. Louis, which in many ways, when they get to Atlanta, is a very different kind of thing. Atlanta, the Hawks basically had no fan base when they got there. Pro basketball really didn't have a history in the region. There was an aspect of the predominantly suburban white fan base they were trying to seek out, having a predominantly black team. The fans didn't initially support that team. They bring in Pete Maravich. There's an uptick in interest just because Maravich is the most famous basketball player in the country, a player from the region. So there's a degree of him as an attraction initially, but in terms of long-term durable support, the Hawks have a major problem with that in Atlanta. It's really not until the 1980s, and I would argue with the expansion of Atlanta's black middle class, that the Hawks end up having a very durable, consistent base of support. Many people who were basketball fans couldn't have afforded to go to the games, but suddenly, as a result of the expansion of the black middle class in Atlanta, there was a larger audience of people potentially interested in basketball who ended up supporting the team, and the Hawks ended up being, they're relatively a middle of the pack team in terms of attendance now in the NBA. And obviously there's been an uptick recently because of their success, but have been fairly steady, at least in terms of fan support, since the mid 1980s. But that's something that took them many, many years to develop.
How did you happen to select Atlanta for your book? Did you have any prior background there? And how, if it was 900 pages originally, reduced to 500 some, how long did you spend in your research? Must have been an incredible amount of time.
This has been the product of a decade of work. It began in graduate school. When I was getting my PhD, my areas of interest were the history of America's cities and also the history of American culture. And I'm a lifelong sports fan, so I wanted some way to use sports as a way to talk about other aspects of society, talk about politics, talk about the economy. My interest is in post-World War II America too. So I got interested in the idea of franchise relocations and the impacts they had on cities. And initially in my proposal, I wanted to talk about this in a very broad sense, almost more basically just an economic sense about what impact it had on the country. My advisor suggested pick a case study city that was heavily involved with franchise relocations and league expansions as your place to select. And as I looked around, Atlanta went from nothing to having 4 teams so rapidly. It just seemed like a good case study to use. I had no previous connection to Atlanta whatsoever. I looked at Phoenix. I looked at, from the other side of the perspective, cities that were fighting to keep teams. I looked at Cleveland and St. Louis as possibilities as well. But just because Atlanta seemed to exemplify this push by Sunbelt cities to become major league, that's why I ended up picking Atlanta as my subject. And I've used Atlanta essentially as a way to look at broader trends. It's sort of a microcosm of what's happening elsewhere too. But it was a dissertation, and over time dissertations are boring and long-winded. My book is long-winded. It's not boring, but it took some time to turn it from being a dissertation into being a story, and that's what I hope it is: the story of a city and its teams in a particular time and place.
Is this your first book?
This is my first book. I just got my contract for my second book about a week ago, so just getting that one going.
Is it about Houston?
That'll be book 3, I figure. It's a book about college basketball. It's my second book.
So your second book is about what?
College basketball.
College basketball. It's about college basketball in Boston in the 80s. It's kind of this, which it's because Pitino, Calhoun, and Gary Williams all get their start essentially underneath the radar in the city all at the same time. So I'm writing about this rivalry among those teams in the city at the time.
Can you talk about the baseball stadium saga in Atlanta? I mean, didn't they leave Turner Stadium well before its time was up? And
well, I think in the sense they leave it before its time is up in the sense of the stadium still could have been used for another generation, but their deal was actually up with the city. I mean, in secret, the city, the franchise negotiates with this kind of special taxing entity. It's not even the local government, a special taxing district in Cobb County secretly negotiates with the Braves to get this new stadium, which becomes Truist or SunTrust or whatever. They'll probably change the name again next week. The stadium they built out in the burbs that opened in 2017. I cover in the last 3 or 4 chapters of the book, I cover the more recent angles of this. The book's primarily focused on the 60s and 70s, but I certainly go into the more recent stadium deals Atlanta does. I argue that Atlanta gets smarter and more pragmatic about this. Essentially, they walk in and because their cities have so little experience with this going in, they really don't know how to go about doing this. They pay for their first stadium with, God forbid, a property tax. I don't think anywhere would pass that now as the way to pay for a stadium. I mean, people, it's rental cars, it's out of towners, it's a hotel fee. You find some way to seem like it's either rich people or people from out of town who are paying for it. The idea that a guy owning a 2-bedroom ranch style house is going to pay for the stadium is just, I think, a lot less politically feasible than it was back then. So they build the stadium, they throw up really quickly. The city runs it for many years. They don't run it terribly well. And really, by the time Turner Field gets built, at Olympic Stadium gets built, which becomes Turner Field, they really needed a new stadium because it was falling apart. I interviewed dozens of fans who went to the stadium for many years and heard all kinds of horrible stories about all kinds of rodents crawling around the bathrooms and the concession stands, and all aspect of horror type film I heard about the stadium. And Turner Field, I think some people thought was a little on the sterile side, but I mean, I think Atlanta Fulton County Stadium to some extent had that issue as well. The new stadium has a lot of the new bells and whistles in it. It's part of me kind of I don't like that they kind of give up on the city of Atlanta in a way. I find that frustrating. They're certainly trying to move their team to where their fan base is, and in many ways, I think that kind of reflects some of the underlying racial issues that are covered in the book, and also that have existed for decades in the city, particularly as there's been a power struggle between majority Black Atlanta as a political base than the majority suburban white political base. In many ways, it's the latest chapter in a half-century long political struggle in terms of that as well, which I get into to some extent in the book as well.
Why is Dale Murphy not in the Hall of Fame?
I did a podcast about that roughly a week ago. There's this podcast called Pod of Fame, and I argue vociferously on his behalf. If it's based on the character clause, I can't think of anybody who'd be more deserving of it than him. He's the 1987 Sports Illustrated Athletes Who Care guy from baseball. I would argue in the 7-year period between 81 and 87, he's not only as famous as anyone in baseball because he's on national television every night with TBS, he's also one of the game's top performers. Back-to-back MVPs, which he follows up with 2-year, 84 and 85, leading the National League in home runs. I think because he aged like a player would normally age in his early to mid-30s, getting older, as opposed to the next generation of players who that didn't happen, who turned into Tuck Everlasting. I think he gets punished for that. He was an excellent defensive outfielder. And I would argue he's the first baseball star of cable television, being the face of the Braves organization throughout the TBS era. I just remember throughout my childhood, the game was largely built around when Dale Murphy is coming up to bat. Going into every inning, there would be in the hole, Dale Murphy. In 5 batters, it will be Dale Murphy. He may have been 60 and 102, and there may have been 9 people in the stands, but Dale Murphy was a star, and also a star, I think, who did it the right way and is a great role model for young people as well. So to me, I just don't understand why he's not in the Hall of Fame. I'm sure there's all kinds of great analytical reasons that people can make, but I guess I'm going with my heart on that one, and I certainly think Dale should be inducted.
I did read it somewhere that Dale Murphy was supposed to go with the road committee on this commission of Murphy back in 71, 72. And the committee told Murphy, the plane is overloaded. I don't want you to go with it.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm completely ignorant of that.
The sad thing is that I've heard a lot of people argue, because I've argued for Murphy's induction for a long time. And I hear one faction say Murphy didn't play long enough. And then I've heard the other faction say, oh, he played too long, he hung on. I said, well, wait a minute, if he didn't play long enough, how could he be hanging on? And the guy clearly, his numbers, you stack them up against, Jimmy Rice or Andre Dawson or any of those guys that were contemporaries during that time, he measured favorably. So
I think also in a culture, one thing I also talk about in the podcast, in a cultural sense, there are millions of people who paid specifically to watch Dale Murphy play baseball, who tuned into the television specifically to watch Dale Murphy play baseball. How many other players can you really say that of? It's a relatively limited number. And in terms of if the Hall of Fame has anything to do with actual fame, Dale Murphy was a genuine draw, a genuine box office attraction in a way that few players have been before or since. I think particularly in that era, he is one of the faces of baseball. I know, a lot more people paid to watch Dale Murphy play baseball specifically than did Harold Baines, I would say. Nothing against Harold Baines, but.
well, he was a general manager's nightmare. He kept his nose clean, stayed out of the headlines. He didn't have any extramarital affairs, and he just showed up and did his job. How boring is that?
Hodges is not in the Hall of Fame either.
I'm sorry.
Gil Hodges is not in the Hall of Fame. Kind of like
I think
Dale Murphy earlier on.
Oh, I'm all for Gil Hodges too. I would think his managerial record, I think, should help too. I mean, I just don't understand it.
Clayton, do you know how many drafts the Braves had without input from their scouting department?
I think essentially Brian Brocklin comes in for the 1969 season. They fire a guy named Norb Hecker, who's their first coach. He was a Lombardi assistant that Lombardi said you shouldn't hire him, and it kind of proved out. The first time actually Lombardi came to town, they beat the Falcons 56-3. They scored in the last minute, and he said, this is not a tough team. He just buried his former assistant as best he could when they came to town. In 69, Van Brocklin comes in. Van Brocklin's got professional scouts, but my impression is through the 1980s, the Smith family, they found jobs for their friends, and some of them might have been the scouting department. He had a couple of kids who had prominent jobs. It was sort of a mom and pop operation. In the Atlanta press, they were frequently referred to as the Clampetts. The idea was that they were wealthy and genial and pleasant, but maybe not all that sophisticated as far as football business ways. The blank organization is very different now. I mean, that's a very professionally run organization. They may have their ups and downs, but they're doing things in the way other NFL franchises were. Everybody loved the Smith family, though. They said they couldn't have been nicer. I talked to a number of Falcons players who all spoke very highly of them all personally. Whether they were good at running an organization, it's a tough call. I think they also had a tough position that they ended up in the NFC West, that they ended up traveling more than any team in the league because they had all those West Coast trips all season as a result of it, put them in a tough position. I also think being an expansion team in the NFL in 1966, when you have the AFL draining all that potential talent away from you, the expansion team you're going to have is really going to hamstring you for a bunch of years. I mean, the NFL allowed their teams to protect all but 5 players on their rosters for this expansion draft in 66. I mean, they really had a very bare bones kind of team as a result of this. And any other good player was in the AFL. So the Falcons were put in a very bad position as a result of this. I think both in the case of, I think certainly in that case, they would have been better off ending up in the AFL. They actually got to choose because when they built their stadium, both leagues offered them a franchise suddenly. They'd given Atlanta the cold shoulder from 60 through 65, saying, build a stadium and we'll talk. They did, and they're there fighting over Atlanta, and they choose the NFL primarily because they're so focused on the prestige of being with the major professional league. Pragmatically, the AFL would have probably made more sense, but the NFL was the brand name, and they wanted to be a part of that because they're so focused on the impact this is going to have. The Chamber of Commerce, the city leadership is so focused on the impact this is going to have on the name Atlanta as it rings out across the nation.
Because the Falcons were so crappy, Tommy Novus isn't in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that's ridiculous too. I mean, Tommy Novus is one of the best linebackers of his generation. I think he should be held up there with Butkus. One of the genuine thrills of this project for me was getting to speak with him before he died. We had a nice long chat, and he's, I quote him extensively in the book, and was couldn't have been more generous with his time to me.
So Clayton, you compare, I'm reading some more of this about the book here, and you say you compare other cities like Tampa, San Diego, and Phoenix. They sort of adopted Atlanta's approach. Can you talk a little bit how Tampa did that? And do you have any comments about Tampa's attendance problem as opposed to Atlanta?
Sir. I mean, in many ways, Tampa seems like historic. I mean, Champa Bay now. I've seen that. Yeah. I've seen that in a couple places recently because of the success of their teams. That wasn't the case for decades. I mean, the leadership in Hillsborough County essentially emulated what the leadership in Fulton County did in trying to get a team in. They're just out there sniffing around getting a team. The University of Tampa had a very small football stadium. They built an erector set essentially onto it to be big enough for an NFL team. They're out there hunting to get an NFL franchise. They get one in 76 with the Buccaneers. The franchise's owner, Hugh Culverhouse, was Richard Nixon's tax attorney, actually, as well as Bebe Rebozo. I mean, he was in with that crowd and had made a very good living as a tax attorney. He went around and he hired a lot of football experts, thinking he was going to learn from what Rankin Smith did. The leadership in Tampa is very explicitly modeling what they're doing after Atlanta, that we're going to be the next Atlanta. I mean, they talked openly about this. Culverhouse brings in John McKay from USC, who's obviously a very decorated football coach. Ron Wolf, who later becomes GM of the Packers, a very, very smart guy, is the initial GM of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He builds them a fancy training facility. But again, I think the issue of underestimating what a specific business pro sports is came to haunt the Buccaneers. But they didn't, even though I think they didn't have some of the hamstrings that the Falcons did as a result of the competing AFL. I mean, I guess there was the World Football League that was kind of collapsing at the time. But they were obviously very unsuccessful too. Were a very poor drawing team for many years. Culver House threatened to move the team on a number of occasions. When Glazer buys the team in the 90s, it solidifies the situation. It kind of resembles what happens in Atlanta when Arthur Blank buys the Falcons too. But both organizations, once they have a more professional ownership group comes in, they end up in a better situation. Tampa, in terms of baseball, they build a stadium thinking the White Sox are going to come to the Suncoast Dome, as it was originally called. And that stadium sits around for 8 or 9 years waiting for someone to show up. Eventually, they end up with the Rays. Nobody goes there. For a while, my picture on Twitter was my background picture was a picture of me at a Rays game when I was on a business trip, and I was literally the only person in the bleachers. I took a picture so you could see like the wraparound of the bleachers. I was the only, you could have shot a cannon in the bleachers, and I would have been the only person possibly hurt by it. There were like 900 people there, and I think they were all White Sox fans that day. It was, it's been despite the team's success on the field, it's been a very embarrassing situation. Things have turned out pretty well for the Lightning in recent years, but originally the team's owner was a guy from Japan who had never been to Florida, who was the timeshare king of Japan, as well as a cable TV guy over there. And initially the Lightning didn't have their own building, so they played at the Agricultural Exhibition Fair at the Florida State Fair. Then they move into the Suncoast Dome, which becomes the Rays Stadium, Tropicana Field. So the first sporting events that are held at that baseball stadium are NHL games. So it turned out to be quite a mess in Tampa as well. And I think in many ways they emulated Atlanta's process, and for the first couple of decades had a lot of trouble too.
Yeah, but that stadium's the second worst stadium in baseball behind Oakland.
The corridors are just so narrow. I feel like if 4 people walked shoulder to shoulder, it hit the walls, I think, in that stadium.
If the turf was any more threadbare, you could see dirt. I mean, that's terrible.
They have a ton of giveaways, though. I went 3 straight nights, and I walked away with a great deal of Rays merchandise, just complimentary for my $6 ticket. It was
Wow.
it turned into all my stocking stuffers for the next year for my family.
They'll stay or move the Rays.
I think they'll move. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it just seems like it's an untenable situation down there. Having a team that's so good and just having such indifference to it. I really hope there was talk about building a stadium in Ybor City, which is this really historically interesting neighborhood in Tampa. The historic Cuban neighborhood in the city. Looking at the plans, I really hope they don't do it. I think it's just gonna tear that neighborhood apart. So if they're gonna build the stadium, I hope they don't build it there myself.
They may build it in San Antonio.
Yeah.
Yeah, moving to San Antonio, great. Or moving to Montreal. I live an hour from Montreal. I'd love it if Montreal had a team again. It'd be great. But I was talking to the National Saber Group a couple of weeks ago. It sounds like that city has about 19 different locations they're planning to build the stadium. So who knows? I don't think franchise relocations are anything that's going away quickly because my impression is that these leagues are all slowing down in terms of expansion in a historical sense. I mean, it's really been a less common thing in recent years than it was for much of the last quarter of the 20th century. So I think there's going to be more cities fighting for teams. And it will be interesting to see what the antitrust implications of this are, because every time a team moves, there's congressional hearings and, people fighting to keep their teams in their particular locations. And, since the 1960s with Stuart Symington in Missouri, there have been senators who've, threatened we need to look at the Sports Broadcast Act or baseball's antitrust exemptions as a way to prevent this from happening. So I think push will come to shove on that eventually. I don't know when though.
Same year that Atlanta opened the football stadium and the baseball stadium, it's the same year that San Diego voted not to build a stadium for the Chargers. And that was when the
Yes.
Chargers, now they're the ugly stepsister in Los Angeles.
Yes, I mean, to the day I die, I'll probably. I was gonna say to the day I die, I'll probably call them the San Diego Chargers. I can't. I know they were there in 1960 and Barron Hilton owned them and all that stuff, but it just it doesn't sound right out of my mouth. I apologize for interrupting.
That's fine, it's terrible that San Diego, I mean, if you named your book at Loserville in Atlanta, what's San Diego?
They're Atlanta with really nice beaches, I guess, and the Navy.
About the Olympics, can you touch on that?
I'm sorry, I heard the Olympics. Yeah, oh, I have a chapter on the Olympics. Yes, because in many ways it's what kicks into place the second round of stadium building in Atlanta. It's a generation later. It ends up becoming the Braves Stadium. Essentially, the momentum from the Olympics is what gets a stadium built for the Hawks, a new one, which becomes Phillips Arena. They get the NHL team as a result of this. The city ended up being something in the giving mood as a result of this. It also served as a way to get rid of the old debt from the previous stadiums. There was still a lot of debt service into it, so they wrote into the stadium deals all kinds of gymnastics, intellectual gymnastics, to get rid of all their old debt. So Atlanta Stadium was paid off by the U.S. Olympic Committee is what paid the final, I think, $14 million of debt on Atlanta Stadium off. And in some way, I guess it would have been Philips, the electronics company, that basically paid off the debt from the remaining debt from the Omni when they paid for the naming rights to that arena.
Have we paid for the Astrodome fund?
No.
I'm sorry about the Astrodome.
Yeah, apparently we still owe money on the Astrodome.
We still owe money
You
on
do.
that. Adams expansion.
Wow.
Did the expansion, and 1 year later, bottom line, Bud Boogie. We still got the tax on it.
Wow.
Basic shopping center. The Congress. So.
Any more questions anybody have? This has really been terrific, Clayton, I'll tell you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for having me. It was a genuine pleasure, and look forward to coming back at another meeting just as an observer sometime. This was a lot of fun. Loserville is available through the University of Nebraska Press. February 1st. You can pre-order it now through Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all those other locations. I'm on Twitter at Clayton Truder. I'm also happy to be your friend on Facebook too. So those are the various ways to contact me. And thanks again for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hopefully we'll see you in Baltimore.
Looking forward to it. Absolutely.
Okay, let's change, don't leave us. We've got a couple of directions we can go. Let me first ask our editor-in-chief, Tony, if you would comment on the newsletter,
Yeah.
where we stand, because we have another edition coming up real quick, and maybe Scott has some comment.
Scott is the brain behind it.
You need to move this way because you're blocked by the column and you're gonna be in the way.
Oh, I'm gonna wait here. Get out of your way.
Here you go, Tony.
What do you stand?
Right there,
Right there.
Yeah, I don't want to be.
Look at the camera.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, look at the camera. There you go.
Look at me, Tony.
Look at the camera.
Look at me, Tony.
I didn't know I was that old. Well, we've got some articles
Takes
already.
10 years up.
What? It does, does it work?
Yeah.
I thought that Eddie would do it. Well, we have a news which will be coming out sometime in October.
The end of October, unless the Astros are in the World Series, we might push them.
Yeah, I think it's only fair. If we get in the World Series, we'll have to delay it a little bit. We've got some articles already. Mike Vance is writing something about how.
Well, I haven't followed up with him recently, but it's supposed to be a kind of follow-up on the cheating articles we had last.
This will be the definitive article on baseball cheating, which is something that is near and dear to the hearts of all New York sports fans. So we'll have that. We'll have some short articles. We're always in the, Bob has his president's article. If anybody has any short articles they want to give to us. Mine is going to be about 1,500 words, which is almost
Too long.
too long, but we'll cut it mercilessly.
No, probably not for him, but, well, he will probably be the major article, and then we've got a couple other small articles that we'll publish.
Yeah.
But we could take some more articles if people want, if we can't get to this issue.
We'll
We'll
have
get to the
something
next
on,
one.
we'll have something on Jim West.
Yeah.
The
Joe
last
West.
umpire.
Joe West, yeah,
pardon me,
Joe.
Joe West.
Now,
Joe
Jeff
West
Brand
is
is ready
very
to.
popular here in Houston. Right to say, especially after what the 2018 series against the Red Sox. But regardless of that, he's a one of a kind. So we're going to have an article on Joe West. Again, if anybody has some shorter articles that you're interested in having us examine, please send it to us.
Joe, you have another article on
Didn't really plan on it for this one, but maybe for the next.
okay. At one point, I thought you had a second article that we couldn't get in last time.
No.
You know what'd be a good subject for this coming issue, since we're gonna publish it at the end of October, maybe hopefully November. If anybody wants to write a recap of the Astro season, it'd be timely. So, just a 500, 700 word article on that would be nice.
It's all, Bob and I were talking today, is unusual about how our veteran pitchers go about 4 or 5 innings and they have to leave the game. And we're depending upon our relief pitchers to get us through. These guys are making billions of dollars a year, they're prime of life, and they can't go 3 or 4 innings. It's a strange phenomenon. Maybe that's true of everybody in Major League. Have you noticed, by the way, that the length of baseball games has not shortened appreciably? Almost every game is at least 3 hours. If you look at the pitching, everybody's using 9 or 10 pitchers for a game, even at 2 to 1, 3 to 2 games. I think managers just gone wild, but it's a length of the game. I don't know if people find it boring or not, but it certainly is a phenomenon that the length of the baseball game seems to increase regardless of what people are doing, what the pitcher wants to do. So that may be a topic worth considering as well.
So plus you got the umpires, you got the umpires checking every pitcher coming off, to see if he's using any spin tactics, and you got, all that stuff.
If you don't put the ball in play, it's gonna be a long, slow game.
Yep.
Too many walks, too many strikeouts, too many pitching changes.
Yes.
Any Randy Jones or Jim Cotty?
And I haven't figured out yet why in the hell everybody keeps bitching about, excuse my French, but why they keep griping about the shift. I said, if you want to beat the shift, just be a hitter.
Yeah.
They can't bunt. They can't hit to the opposite field. If you hit it where they aim, and that's easy. But no, they're too busy looking at arc angle and, what I'm going to do and, and driving it. Everything's going to be all or nothing. The game is not what it was.
Around here, Ted was.
Well, Ty Cobb, retired at the age of 42 or 43. He was hitting 330, 340 every year, even his last years with Philadelphia. He won 357 with his age before he retired.
One thing I did see over the weekend was in one of the low minor leagues, they have a pitch clock, and they have shortened their games by 21 minutes per game. I'm not sure, it was 15 seconds. 15-second clock, and if you don't pitch, it's a ball.
Well, that's
And now whether that'll, come up to eventually, but I think that's a great step in the right direction.
Well, you get a quality of umpiring back up. They don't have to throw as many pitches.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, the
Yeah.
umpires are blowing the hell out of it.
So we have lots to write about,
Yeah.
lots to discuss. So please think about it. Send your articles, drafts over to us, and we'll.
I just had a question about the length of the game and the complaint about the length of the game. Has anyone ever seen any definitive article where there's been a lot of research as to cross-section of fans and advertisers and other people's opinion about the length of the game? Because when I go to a game and look around at some of the people sitting there, I kind of wonder, is this family's one game of the year they come to? And if so, they probably don't want it to end in 2 hours. They probably want to have a nice long game with, the the Astros are pretty dang good about making it entertaining with the scoreboard between innings and such. Maybe they don't want to have a quick game. So I've always wondered, is there somebody who's done a lot of surveys?
You think it's just maybe,
And maybe-
a complaint of sports writers who have to make a deadline?
Right, that's, yeah, and maybe advertisers like a long game. I don't know.
Well,
There's still a lot of advertising time.
I don't think they complain about the length if the game is light.
right.
Yes,
If
yes.
it can be a 3 hour, 15-minute game, it can be very interesting. By the same token, it can be very dull and very boring. That's what makes the difference.
Okay.
You gotta put the ball in play.
Yeah.
You have to throws to bases. You got a base runners run.
Yes, yes.
Hit the ball out of the ballpark used to be exciting. Today, it's too commonplace. It's too routine and there's no action when that happens.
Nobody complained about game 5 of the World
I guarantee you this, I sat there and my jaw dropped. I had 4 of my friends that, supposedly boring, 1-0. I mean, I said, dude, you don't like a pitching duel? I mean, what's wrong with this, So it's like, oh, we want to see runs, 16 to 15. I said, shit, that's football.
We should just put a runner on second base every year.
That would do something.
Who runs for a triple?
Let's take about 5.
Yeah. I want to make a few remarks first. So. I want to let you want more about it. Just hold on. I've got money for that.
All right, everybody,
That's for me.
okay, Greg.
Yeah.
Scott. Attention here. Tony, you ready?
Ready?
You come back and look later. I'm sure there'll be some
We're in the final 2 weeks of the season, and then obviously that brings the postseason. And as a result of that, I thought it might be appropriate to base the trivia contest for this meeting on World Series questions.
Okay.
And for the benefit of those on Zoom, as I discussed with Bob, I'm going to verbalize this as we go along. But let's go ahead and pass these out. And mic here. So because we're on Zoom, I think we ought to take it question by question. And that gives me an opportunity, maybe on some of them, to give you a few hints. If you haven't boned up on World Series recently, some of these are pretty easy. Some you're going to find very difficult. I'll be surprised if anybody gets the answer to a couple of them. There's 33 possible points here, because some questions have more than one answer. 33 possible points. I suspect it's going to take at least 20 to win, and I would suspect 22 or 23 might do it. I hope I've underestimated. Somebody will do better than that. Those back there on Zoom have a benefit from a standpoint of their resources. We don't. Okay, so I'll start with question number 1. The New York Yankees have won the most World Series championships with 27. What team has won the second most?
Question. We say team, like using.
Franchise. Franchise. So if you're talking Oakland, you're talking Kansas City, and Philadelphia. Talking Baltimore, you're talking St. Louis Browns. Giants, obviously, New York, San Francisco, Dodgers. Okay, I'm going to go on to question number 2. What team has lost the most World Series? Again, franchise. Okay, question number 3. What teams have never won the World Series? There are 6. Give you a hint, there's 3 from each league.
Question, needs to be teams that are currently in baseball? As far as-
Yeah, yeah. 6 teams. We got 1 point for each correct team.
You know, all 30 teams.
So this from the 30 teams today,
Yes,
what you're saying?
yes. Couple more seconds on this one. Okay, while you're still reflecting, we're going to question number 4. What team has never appeared in the World Series?
Team itself, sure.
Just point of information here, those first 4 questions obviously were team related. And I said the Yankees had won the most championships. Yankees have appeared in 40 World Series. They've played in 134 World Series games. The next team has played in 58. Okay, the next 4 questions are manager related. Question number 5. What managers have won the most World Series? There's a tie. There are 2 of them. Managers with the most World Series wins. Next question, number 6. What managers have won World Series with teams from both leagues? Again, that's a tie. There are 2 of them. Managers that won with both American and National League teams. Question number 7. This is a tough one. What manager with 20 or more World Series games has the best won-loss percentage? Games won and lost, 20 or more games. You either know it or you don't. So I'm going to go on then. Go on to question number 8. What manager has lost the most World Series games? Know it or you don't. The next 6 questions are related to pitching performance, pitchers in the World Series. Question number 9. What pitcher has won the most World Series games? And either know it or you don't. Number 10. What pitcher threw three complete game shutouts in a single World Series?
Al, what's a complete game?
He was a finishing pitcher. He's starter and finishing pitcher.
We don't really see those much.
I haven't seen one of those in my lifetime.
He's forgotten.
They did that back in the day, huh?
Three complete game shutouts. Not very recent.
No, that's what I'm trying to think back.
Okay, you turn the page or turn the sheet over, question 11. The most number of World Series games won without a loss by a pitcher is 6. What pitcher holds that 6-0 record? Question 12. There are 13 pitchers who have won 3 games in a single World Series. I thought about asking them to name all 13, but I decided it would get easy. Who is the most recent one to have done so? That has won 3 games in a World Series. The most recent one.
Well, your other question about complete games got me thinking, when was the last time they let a starter try to do 3 games in a World Series? They used to be 147. That was the whole thing. Now it's.
Best for the most recent, if you're just curious, the others who have done it may help you eliminate some. Mickey Lolich in 1968, Gibson in 1967, Burdette in 57, Harry Burkeen in 1946 for the Cardinals, Stan Kovaleski in 1920 for Cleveland, Ed Faber in 2017 for the White Sox, Smokey Joe Wood in 1912 for the Red Sox, Colby Jack Coombs in 1910 for the Philadelphia Athletics, Babe Adams in 2009 with Pittsburgh. Christy Mathewson in 1905. Deacon Philippi in 1903 for Pittsburgh. And it said 1903 was the first World Series. Stan Philippi won 3 games for Pittsburgh, and Bill Dineen won 3 games for the Red Sox. So those were the other 12.
But they played 9.
That's right. Okay, so question 13. Who has pitched in the most World Series games? Question 14 is one of my favorites. ERA for pitchers who have pitched 25 or more innings in a World Series career is Madison Bumgarner's 0.25. A former Astro pitcher has the second best World Series career ERA with 0.36. Who is that pitcher? Former Astro pitcher, World Series career, 25 or more innings, career ERA of 0.36. Okay, the final 6 questions are player related. Number 15, what players that hit walk-off World Series winning home runs? Not game home runs, but winning the World Series with a walk-off home run. There are 2 of them. Walk-off home runs that won the World Series. One of them is very notable. The second one, pretty notable. Question 16, who has hit the most World Series home runs? '17, what players have hit 3 home runs in a single World Series game? There are 4 such players. 4 players that have hit 3 home runs in a single World Series game. A couple of them are very well known. The other 2, perhaps not as much, but were more recent.
One of them is to do with the answer. I didn't say that.
Okay, question 18. What players hold the record of hitting 5 home runs in 1 World Series? There are 3 such players. 5 home runs in a World Series. Really? All within the last 50 years.
Like 1907.
Got a home run Baker. Okay, question 19. Who has appeared in the most World Series games? Last one, number 20, is really tough. Players for the Yankees hold the top 7 spots, obviously, in the number of World Series games played. What non-Yankee ranks next? Ranks 8th in most World Series played, but did not play for the Yankees. It's a tough one. I refer you back to whatever your answers were in questions 2 and 3. What team has lost the most World Series? What team has won the second most? That would be the clue for the player number 20. Hats off if anybody gets this. Just kidding around with 21. What team will win the 2021 World Series in the event of a tie here today? We'll wait till the World Series and declare the winner in November. I thought just be interested to get the answers to that. So just messing around with you.
Good question.
Okay, anybody want me to repeat anything for any reason until they're in writing and I hope I gave you enough time? You ready for the answers?
Yes, sir.
None? Okay, question number one, team that won the second most World Series, St. Louis Cardinals with 14, excuse me, with 11. Question two, what team has lost the most World Series? Los Angeles Dodgers with 14. Just for your entrance, the Yankees, as I said, have been in 40 World Series, the Dodgers in 20, they're 6-14. The Giants have been in 20, the Cardinals have been in 19, they've won 11 of the 19. Okay, question number three, teams that have never won the World Series. In the National League, Colorado, Milwaukee, San Diego, American League, Seattle, Tampa Bay, and Texas. Number four, 6 points, you got each one. Seattle, Tampa Bay, and Texas. Question four, what team has never appeared in the World Series? Seattle. Manager-related question. Number five. What answer to three again? Number three is Colorado, Milwaukee, San Diego, Seattle, Tampa Bay, Texas. Number five, managers have won the most World Series. There are two of them with 7 each, Casey Stengel and Joe McCarthy.
Ah,
I had the Joe.
I got McCarthy, but I didn't.
Number six, I had Joe Torre. Number six, Sparky, team, managers have won with both teams, Sparky Anderson and Tony La Russa.
oh my.
In St. Louis, Cincinnati, and Detroit. Number seven, what manager 20 or more World Series games has the best won-loss percentage?
McCarthy?
Joe McCarthy. It's 30-13. 698 winning percentage. Six was Vanilla. Six was Sparky Anderson and Tony La Russa. Seven is Joe McCarthy. Eight managers lost the most World Series games.
Austin. McGraw.
Kellen McGraw. Number nine, what pitcher has won the most World Series games? 94 to 10. Question 10, 3 complete game shutouts in a single World Series. Christy Mathewson, 1905. What number of World Series games won without a loss by a pitcher? 6-0. Who is that? Lefty Gomez. Anybody get that? Who's the most recent pitcher to win 3 games in a single World Series? Question 12. Randy Johnson. 13. Who's pitched in the most World Series games? Red Rose. Mariano Rivera.
Oh.
Well, these pictures don't count. He didn't say pitch, he didn't say start. Yes.
Okay, 14. Anybody get this one? Any
Schilling?
answers?
Kurt Schilling.
Schilling.
Anybody else?
Garrett Cole.
Jack Bellingham. Jack Bellingham, 7 games over 3 World Series for the Reds.
My goodness.
He did it. I told you some were tough.
Wish I'd known that.
Okay, player related. Walk-off World Series winning home runs. Mazeroski and Joe Carter.
I got Tommy Henry, but this
Number 16, most World Series home runs. Mickey Mantle with 18. 17, what players 3 home runs in a single World Series? 4 of them. Reggie is 1. Babe Ruth is 2.
Gary?
No.
Gene Tennis.
Mantle?
No.
Pablo
Sandoval is right. 2012, and Albert Pujols, 2011. Babe Ruth, 1926, Reggie Jackson, 1977, Pujols, 2011, Sandoval, 2012.
Reggie's now working for the Astros.
Right.
That's great.
18, 5 home runs and 1 World Series.
Springer, Mantle,
Springer is right.
Jackson,
Jackson is right.
Snyder,
Barry Bonds.
Chase Utley, 2009. Reggie Jackson, 1977. Chase Utley, 2009.
I had Mantle before you said.
George Springer, 2017.
I'll be darned.
well done.
I think that's something.
Most World Series games.
Yogi.
75 games over 14 series. He's played in more games than the second club has. Okay, question 20. What non-Yankee has played in the most World Series games?
Pee Wee Reese.
That's a good guess. That's a good guess, but not right.
Frankie Frisch.
Frankie Frisch is right.
Oh,
Way to go. That's impressive.
He probably knows who wins the World Series that year.
Who said that? Lions and Cardinals.
Okay, that's,
I'll be darned.
Okay, now the moment of truth.
add them up. There are 33 possible points. How many got 20 or more?
How come I not here anymore?
Mike? I still told you 22 or 23 would win it. Anybody else? Greg? Anybody else over 20 besides Mike?
22. I got 22.
22, you're on a tie, so it comes down to the tiebreaker. Who's going to win the World Series? Who you pick? Who you pick?
I concede to Frankie Frisch. Big Pee Wee Reese. He got the last question right.
You guys are in a tie or are you conceding?
I'll concede to Frankie.
Okay. Okay.
Well, I wrote it.
Okay, Fred, you got it.
I wrote it down before.
Good job, okay. That was a terrific quiz, too.
Okay, so, hello.
Whoa, John Lloyd, how many did he have? Time out.
What's that?
John, how many did you have?
I only had 16.
So who won?
Marcy, you hear somebody?
Yeah, I can't hear with everybody talking, so,
Why do you have 2 screens?
because my sound is not on one.
No, you did such a good job. We'd love for you to do it again sometime this year.
Okay.
That was great. That was great.
I like that.
Okay, that was fun putting that together. I'll do another one for you sometime.
Great. Okay, anybody have any comments they'd like to make? Comments, questions?
That's a great quiz.
Brad, your stuff. Oh, you won the honor.
Okay, I'm gonna ask questions out of this.
There you go. Okay,
You know, be a
new member,
Yes.
you have any comments or questions?
That was great. Thanks for welcoming me.
How many did you get?
What's that?
How many did you get?
Oh, I got like 3. 4.
I got 19 on one.
That's steady up. That's steady up.
Western Topeka League.
I called that game.
They're really good. Oh, yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah.
You got somewhere.
What was the question where Billingham was the answer?
Out on the range and he's in the grill system.
Pal, you had a question about Billingham. What was the question?
Go ahead.
When Billingham was the answer, what was that question?
Question was, what pitcher with second lowest ERA? Second lowest World Series career ERA with either, they say 20 or 25 innings with 25 or more innings, second lowest career World Series ERA.
I can answer the question.
It's amazing when I think about Billingham having a low ERA. It just boggles my mind.
Yeah, he went down for a little bit. Well, with the Reds, with the Reds as a relief pitcher, he was very effective. And actually, the 7 games, a couple of those were starts.
Yeah, he started a lot of games in the World Series.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
He said he started a lot of games. Norm.
25 days.
Bellingham started games in 75 and 76 for the Reds, I believe.
So what is the Ryan?
Okay, let's see how many more books we have here, guys.
Did the sound go off?
We paid Maddie with a free run. We pay son.
There was another one. No, everything was.
You know, one of my favorites. My favorite.
Gave him from the San Diego.
He was being interviewed.
Yeah.
All you do about. And so she wants. Perfect.
If they'll allow us to leave what books are still here for next time, in case there's some other folks who come who might be interested. We still have about 20 left.
I'm gonna take them to Goodwill. They are.
Well, your books, you need a bunch of them.
I don't want.
I know that, but you know, whatever.
Can we bring more books or something here?
Take them.
Let's take them back.
I'll bring some more books.
Here, I'll look again.
If anybody's interested in a large baseball, I'm trying to get rid of that, close to 1,000 books. So. It's free. Boom. Somebody can use it.
Yeah. They're not donating. They didn't do it just.
Where are they? Our next meeting, we don't know when the next meeting will be because of the playoffs. Typically, we'll schedule the third Monday in October, which is like the 22nd, the 18th and 19th, but whatever the date is. But if the Astros are playing at home, we'll have to shift it to another date. So we'll let you know. We'll see if they're still playing.
But it should be before the Georgia Ranch baseball.
It will be before, well, yes, it should be before the George Ranch. That's why I mentioned George Ranch.
Anybody that has a young person with good knees, and a fair amount of coordination and weighs less than 350 pounds, that might want to come out and play baseball.
Have a ringer?
No, we just need enough to get 2 teams together.
You use gloves.
Hey,
No,
Don't use gloves. The game is played a lot like slow pitch, but with a baseball sized ball that's softer.
But it's still pretty hard to tell.
But the pitching is underhanded, and then there's some rules that make it interesting.
Where the Spurs like?
7 to 8, 8, 7, you know, there's a little scoring, because you hit the ball as far as you want to, but you're catching on one bounce, you're out. And most folks can catch up to a lot of folks.
Just
can-
wait. Get it under.
Yeah.
You don't always get a true bounce, so.
We're playing fields, we play out, that's what, you know.
Okay, so it's
Fast.
kind of rock or something.
Yeah, wow.
It's a lot of fun.
It's fun. The first thing is when you foul the ball off, bounce behind, catch it, get out of it. That kills you.
And if you hit the ball fair, and it hits the ground fair, it's fair no matter where it goes past it.
It's good. Umpire blind we may have a opportunity to have a professional baseball player play on our team. We're looking at that, see if we'll sign a contract with us. He just signed with Chicago White Sox and he's finishing up his rookie ball.
They finished yesterday.
Anyway, that might be fun because he can hit one. But that'd be mine. And that's it.
Yeah, but that can get it around.
That's what you did. That's what you did.
Siri got a home run the first inning.
Oh my goodness. Who did?
Siri.
He started. He started. First inning, they moved him up in the order. Altuve's not playing tonight, I believe.
He must be leading off.
What about Tucker? Is he playing town?
He let off and homered to the left, and then Bergman flew out, Alvarez singled, Gurriel singled, Tucker struck out, Correa singled to score a second run. And they're still hitting, Gonzalez slide out to left, that'd be the third out. Yeah,
Give him a
Alvarez.
chance.
He was back.
Great. Not bad. Tucker's back, so I guess he wasn't hurt too badly.
They hit 300.
He could. He could.
He's up to 295, now 296. But I don't pay attention. Where did these come from?
I can't read it.
Oh,
What do you want?
Yeah, they got one over by me now.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you. Great meeting.
Take care.